Many in Citrus County are mourning the loss of 2 young teens killed in a weekend crash. A third teenager still recovering in the hospital right now.
It's terrible. It didn't have to happen.
Florida Highway Patrol is continuing to investigate the crash, but say alcohol was definitely involved and that charges will likely be filed at some time in the near future. Reporting in Citrus County, Kara Mashik, ABC Action News.
As I began my research on this taboo topic, I began to wonder why this issue was taboo in the first place. If the topic were that a certain minority group was being disenfranchised or systematically discriminated against in, say, for example, civil courts or criminal courts, we would have heard an outcry from civil rights groups all across the country. There would be protests in the streets. But when millions of men seek fair treatment in the eyes of the family courts, our society turns the other way, ordering them to accept the rubber stamp ruling in mom's favor. Take them like marching orders to war, suck it up, and simply do as you're ordered. And the argument of what's best for the kids? Well, modern-day mental health experts almost all agree, barring those with drug, alcohol, or other abuse issues, gender of parents aside, it's in the best interest of all children to have both parents
in Naperville, Illinois, where they treated 500 opioid-dependent patients last year.
You see the carfentanil and the fentanyl as well as heroin and...
Yep, we see a little bit of everything.
According to the CDC, overdoses kill about 5 people every hour across the U.S.
The potency and toxicity of what's on the street is very high right now. And so we think there probably is not an increase in people using drugs, but there's an increase in the danger associated with a single use.
More lives this weekend.
Every day brings another story about the depth of this country's opioid crisis. Overdoses up, emergency services overwhelmed, another family burying a loved one.
We are back now with a deep dive into one of the most serious crises facing people in this country, overdoses. They're now the #1 killer of people under the age of 50. More people die from that than from car crashes, HIV, or gun deaths.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the opioid epidemic is getting worse. In 45 states, emergency room visits for overdoses are up 30%, and there are virtually no signs of it getting better.
The nation's opioid crisis remains a slow-moving disaster, responsible for some 40,000 overdose deaths in America.
My introduction was my sister. She does not exactly fall into the drug and alcohol addiction category. She was certainly dabbling. She was an 18-year-old young girl that was out having fun, doing things. That 18-year-old in the mix of that. She was by far an addict of any kind. However, Sage is a perfect precursor for me to kick this off with, because she is kind of a signification of the end result.
Feminist activism is really very simple, and that is that feminists blame all social ills, all the problems that we have, really, especially regarding marriage and the family, education, jobs, and the like, on the patriarchy. You know, whenever something goes wrong, it's the man's fault, and it's the system, and it's all messed up. When men's rights activists come together to truly address these problems, all they're interested in is just solving the problem. The family, domestic violence, by the way, goes both ways. People don't know that because feminists own the dialogue when it comes to these topics. The assumption is that women are always victims and men are the perpetrators. That is absolutely statistically false.
So by the time I had moved out of the sheer madness of home, I left left behind a train wreck. The battle continued, and eventually my little sister was taken by DCF. And inevitably, the quagmire between my mother, my stepdad, Michael, and the state landed squarely on Michael's shoulders. Mike was to go to prison. 1 year. After some time, Michael moved back in with my mother and grandmother and eventually got Sage back. Of course, it wasn't long before the battles raged on once again. My mother and grandmother seemed to share a relentless and unforgiving disdain for Michael, but he did not deserve to be relentlessly chastised and provoked and beaten down. That kind of treatment from those you unconditionally love is quite literally the antithesis of supporting your family. As things inevitably escalated, Michael found a new love in his life, my mother's pain pills. Thus begins the downward spiral that sent Michael straight into his demise. One night in particular stands out in my drug-hazed memory. Mike and I were out bar hopping. He had been fighting with the household as usual, and we decided to leave and blow off some steam. We made it back home by way of some kind of miracle, and as soon as we walked in the door, it began. The onslaught. Mike was in bad shape and had already graduated from pain pills to heroin, and after my mother and grandmother finished their relentless ear beating on Mike, they kicked him out. So I helped him pack and move into a small apartment with a guy he knew. We finished up, I told him to keep his head up. Maybe it's time to call it quits, get your own place, start over, make a new life for yourself. He just looked down and said, I know. So I gave him a hug, told him to give me a call. It wasn't much more than a week later that I got the phone call. Mike had overdosed on that same apartment floor that I had helped him move into. And I just stood there and stared at Michael, lifeless in the hospital bed, tears streaming down my face, and I just said, man, I'm fucking sorry. I'm sorry. Mike deserved better, but he also deserved to do better by himself. We need to be there for each other. Seeing my little sister being used as a bargaining chip because, you know, she knew Mike loved that little girl so much. It's doing shit like that is just some of the most heinous shit, to use a child as a bargaining chip and using them against somebody. That is just heinous. I love you, Mike. Rest in peace. Manic Asylum.